Yeah, so we have just under an hour. We have about 45 minutes or so. And if we look at our program again, what I'm going to do is run this panel on reconstruction, the future of the Ukrainian economy, together with the final panel at the end, which was really looking to the future, what might happen in the future. Because I think we've actually heard a lot about that already. So I want to give most of the time really to this question about the economy. Because remember we said about why we're doing this conference, why the Economic Forum is doing this conference. And my thanks again to Sigmund Bedekovsky, host, and the Economic Forum. That's Andres Squidslow at the back representing Sigmund. And again, to draw your attention to the work of the Economic Forum, our host, this brochure at the back, and the economic report. And you can find a lot in the economic report from the Warsaw School of Economics about issues relating to the reconstruction of Ukraine and the future of the Ukrainian economy. And so the questions that we have for this panel, which I'm delighted to say are going to be moderated this time by Alex Sabel, who is the co-chair. Bob Seeley, who we met earlier, is the Conservative co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Ukraine, and Alex is the Labour co-chair. We also have, and I hope I've got this right in terms of pronunciation, correct me if not, Vladimir Henko, who's Associate Professor of Sustainable Urban Development at Oxford University. I sometimes have difficulty, according to my Italian friends, pronouncing my name. So if I've had difficulty pronouncing yours, that's all I can say in my defense. It's me, not you. Tim Ash, Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House, and another fellow from Chatham House, Olga Togoruk. Again, the same routine, questions to each of you on the panel, and then I will take questions from the audience and pass those questions from the audience to Alex. But actually, let me just pass all the questions to you, Alex. So let me start off with the three that our panelists have prepared. And the first one is, what should be the funding priorities for post-conflict reconstruction in Ukraine? So perhaps, Alex, I could pass that question to you. You might like to say something about it. Please introduce yourself as well. Say anything you'd like to say. Thank you again for being with us yesterday at dinner and hosting us in the House of Commons. And perhaps you could moderate the panel, and I'll ask the other questions and solicit more from the audience. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks, Roger. There we go, it's working now. This is a real challenge, because what we need to do is reconstruct Ukraine while the war is still ongoing. And that provides multiple challenges. So in deoccupied areas, much of the land is mined. So we need to demine the land. The UK is leading those efforts with Halo Trust and MAG, alongside Ukrainian national regional governments and the Ukrainian military. The question of who pays the reconstruction is a deeply political one, because Russian assets are frozen, and in Parliament, certainly the Ukraine group is calling for the seizure of those assets to be redistributed for the reconstruction of Ukraine, but the UK government, for various reasons, willing yet to legislate on that. And the issue of displaced people, both internally and displaced internationally, and whether those people return to where they originally lived or live in new areas of Ukraine, with the need for new housing, new infrastructure to be built, and potential for effectively a westward migration in Ukraine, with the west of Ukraine being more heavily populated than the east and the south, for obvious reasons. And all of that against the background of what we know is now developed war of attrition. I'm not going to go back on all the things we said before, but because of the slowness of military aid being supplied by the West. And then there's that, there's in the notes, which have now gone, there's an estimate of cost, but recently the Alt-European strategies in Kyiv, there was a lot of discussion on this, and actually the reality is that we'll probably, by the time the war is concluded, will probably be north of $1 trillion in terms of reconstruction. And so it's a moving feast every month. The cost of reconstruction increases. And there's a whole load of other issues around what does reconstruction in the future Ukraine look like in terms of things like energy security. And Ukraine isn't going to go back to energy production the way it was. It's going to become reliant on renewable energy. We're going to see much more sustainable development. Ukraine could become an exemplar for the green transition, the green transformation of the planet. If we're going to spend that much money on Ukraine, why would we spend it to rebuild the old when we can create the new and it for it to be an exemplar? Anyway, that's probably enough from me, and those sort of things that we discussed in Parliament in the group. I'm probably going to turn to Vlad first because he seems to have a very large presentation. So the first question, Vlad, is what should the funding process of post-conflict reconstruction in Ukraine be? Hopefully your presentation addresses some of these.
Thank you. I've been doing a few talks recently on how post-war reconstruction can jumpstart the Ukrainian economy. Typically they are long presentations. I just want to highlight some of the headline figures and especially perhaps put some, if not smile, but some positivity back on the agenda, because we have quite a few grim places during the sessions on the war, on the slow delivery of weapons that Ukraine needs, and I totally agree with previous speakers that we need to finish the war, we need to clear the land from the brutal occupying forces, and then after the mines and the rest of it. And of course, that is the first priority. Yeah, at the same time, we can still start thinking about the post-war reconstruction as well. We can chew gum and walk, as one person said. What we can assess at the moment, and the 1 trillion figure, potential 1 trillion figure of Ukrainian recovery needs, it hasn't been confirmed, but it probably will be true. We've had an assessment from the World Bank, the Ukrainian government, European Commission, after the first 12 months of the war, called the Ukrainian recovery needs, and you remember it was published on the anniversary of the first year of the large-scale invasion on 24th of February 2023. The World Bank has agreed that 411 billion was Ukrainian recovery needs, of which 135 billion was direct damage to buildings, infrastructure, etc. We can imagine that after the second year of the large-scale invasion, the figure probably will double, and so on and so forth. However, if we just use the minimum $135 billion figure needed for the recovery of the construction of buildings and infrastructure, hospitals, kindergartens, etc., schools, we can project using a variety of techniques, which I'm not going to go into any detail of, but quite robust techniques. We can project that 135 billion input in Ukrainian construction industry sector over 10 years' time will produce an extra 10% of GDP growth for the duration of reconstruction, in addition to any GDP growth that will normally happen in a country of 30 or 40 million people. So, by the end of the reconstruction period, just on the reconstruction needs, Ukrainian GDP can more than double, and Ukrainian GDP per capita can easily reach over $10,000 on just the reconstruction needs. If we had the normal economy bits into it, we can actually project Ukrainian GDP per capita reaching Poland's level in 20 years' time fairly confidently. That's one kind of figure that I'd like to put. More than 10% of GDP growth just on reconstruction needs alone. Second issue, which Alex has mentioned, is that we don't want to reconstruct everything that used to be, right? We definitely don't want to reconstruct the heavy industries based on coal and fossil fuels. So with colleagues at Oxford, we've been doing some amazing study on green steel Ukraine. Steel has been Ukraine's #1 commodity export through the entire duration of its independence. For 31 years, basic metals have been Ukraine's top commodity export. It is an important industry. It's Ukraine is 9th largest exporter of steel, and it is an important industry generally for the country, and obviously will have to have a lot of reconstruction needs built on steel, not to mention building tanks for the deterrence in the future war. So we've conducted a feasibility study that shows that Ukrainian steel industry would need just $46 billion over a 20-year period to completely wean itself from fossil fuels and completely rebuild as a green economy. 46 billion sounds big figure, but yet talking about 1 trillion potential bill is actually not a massive sum of money. The green steel Ukraine industry will have a gross value added multiplier effect 70% above the fossil fuel traditional steel industry of today. So actually, it's not just a big investment for the climate, but actually a fantastic investment for the Ukrainian economy as well. So we will be able, and we should be able, not just to rebuild the country, but also to build back better and much better. And so far, the analysis that we've had, which is quite robust, I must say, is pretty positive in this regard. So I think we should be looking quite confident in the future. Of course, not forgetting that the first priority is the war itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad. Actually, when I was in Dnipro 2 months ago, I went to the Interpipe electric arc furnace, which was built in 2012, and we're only now converting our facility in Scunthorpe from coking coal to electric arc furnace, and the potential for that Interpipe facility after the war is for it to be using renewable electricity. So actually, in some ways, Ukraine is already ahead of the UK. Olga, what other priorities do you think there are in terms of funding and reconstruction?
Well, thank you very much. I'm my Chatham House fellow now, but I'm also a former journalist, or maybe once a journalist, always a journalist. So we have also in the previous panel, maybe afterwards, if there are questions. This panel, I'm going to speak mostly on the issue of Ukrainian refugees and their return. That's the project I'm currently working on the Chatham House. And, well, just to give you an idea that up to 8 million Ukrainians have left Ukraine as a result of Russian full-scale invasion, which is about 20-25% of the entire population of the country. Majority of these people are women and children, although the latest studies indicate that the number of men is also increasing. Several organizations have conducted sociological studies and included contract groups such as the Center for Economic Strategy, for example, or Rating Group or Odbudowa. And the recent trend that every time new studies conducted, a large number of current refugees declare their intention to remain abroad, not to return to Ukraine, which can have a very detrimental impact not only on Ukraine's demographics, obviously because of loss of many children, millions of children, but on the Ukrainian economy as well. And the projections of the Center for Economic Strategy are that Ukraine can lose up to 7% of its GDP because of non-return of Ukrainian refugees. So I think that definitely is one of the priorities. Not only how to encourage return, because that is dependent on so many factors, and the main factor is security. So when people are asked what are the main preconditions for your return, they will say security. Then the second precondition would be availability of housing, availability of jobs, and then the third precondition would be the reforms, so that they see that reforms are happening in Ukraine and they feel, well, this country has a future, it makes sense to return. So obviously these preconditions have to be addressed so that more people return, but I also believe that a proactive approach could be taken by the Ukrainian government and its partners in other countries in order to encourage the participation of Ukrainian refugees and those who are physically not in Ukraine or not planning to return just yet, or maybe at all, to engage them into the process of rebuilding, because many people who had to become refugees are very highly qualified professionals, Not all of them, but some of them have found jobs, and some of these jobs are according to their qualifications. Actually, it's only about a third of people, of Ukrainians, who are employed abroad. Only about a third work according to their qualifications. But a lot of people are studying, they are learning languages, some of them are getting new education, some of them are doing apprenticeships or other improvement of their professional skills. And I think all this creates opportunities for the Ukrainian government that it shouldn't neglect. Because I believe that so far the messaging on behalf of the Ukrainian government on the issue of Ukrainian refugees has been mixed, to say the least. That there was a huge emphasis on the need of people to return, but there wasn't much willingness and openness to say, well, regardless of whether you return or not, we still care about you and we want you to work together with us to rebuild Ukraine. There are ways to do that, but I think the first step would be just to acknowledge that and to extend this goodwill gesture to millions of Ukrainians who are currently abroad, and not just put the pressure on them that they have to return, but tell them, well, we would like you to return when it's safe. But even if you are now there, we can still work together to rebuild Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. I'll just take Tim, the last speaker, to get this before we move on to the next.
Okay, so maybe a bit of a rude awakening. So I'm an asset manager as well. I work for RBC Blue Bay as well as Chatham House. Manage about $400 billion of assets. I've written a lot on Ukraine reconstruction recovery. And for me, the key is we kind of bring the cart before the horse a bit if we're talking about the shape of the reconstruction. The first point is how we fund it. And I really don't think we've really squared that off. Mentioned already the World Bank report, $411 billion of reconstruction needs as of March, probably going to be like $1 trillion. How are we going to pay for that? Who is going to pay for that? A lot of focus, we've had lots of recovery conferences. There was the London Recovery Conference, there was Lugano, I've done them in Stockholm, etc. Lots of talk about the private sector. The private sector will pay for Ukraine reconstruction. I'm in the private sector, we won't. We've been invested in Ukraine many years. The issue about corruption is a massive one. It hasn't been kind of resolved. Ukraine is in default, right? It cannot borrow in international capital markets. Foreign creditors won't lend money to a country in default. So the reality is that the private sector will not do the heavy lifting. So it's essentially Western taxpayers who are going to have to pay this cost. And the reality is, I don't see that happening. Look at what's happening at the moment in the US Congress. Van der Leyen came to the London Recovery Conference, spoke about 50 billion euros for Ukraine recovery from the period from 24 to 27. That is massively in doubt now, given Orban in Hungary and the veto and all that thing. So, I think we need to be realistic. And, if I would argue Ukraine's victory in the war and successful recovery and reconstruction is the #1 strategic priority for Western democracies since the fall of communism in '89 and '91, right? Ukraine's victory, but that project is important for two reasons. It's important, firstly, Ukraine is the front line for our defense. That's absolutely crystal clear now. We need to build a strong, vibrant economy, Ukrainian economy, able to fund its own defense and our front line and our defense. And secondly, we have to ask ourselves, what happens if we fail? What happens if Ukraine fails? We fail, that we lose the war or we lose the reconstruction. The reality is we'll see millions of Ukrainian migrants moving west. What's the impact of that politically in Europe? I think it's pretty clear. We all know what the reality of that is. So we have to get this right, and we have to be realistic about how we're going to fund it. And the reality is that we're not being realistic about how we're going to pay for it. As I said, taxpayers won't, private sector won't. Where are we going to get the money from? And if we don't get the money, we fail. Ukraine fails, we fail. And the only solution is using frozen Russian assets, $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, about $100 billion of oligarch money. And frankly, I've been arguing for this since June 22. I've written lots of papers on it, and we've had no progress. No progress, but various different reasons put about why we can't do it. One is that frozen Russian assets are not frozen, they're immobilized. But let's move to freezing and then seizing and allocating to Ukraine. The argument against is, firstly, undermines the dollar as a reserve currency. It doesn't, frankly. It undermines dollar because people fear that other authoritarian regimes, Saudi Arabia, China, etc., will move assets out of Western jurisdictions. They've already done that. When the assets were immobilized, the message was already sent. So assets that would have gone have already gone. So it's not going to attack the dollar as a reserve currency, euro as a reserve currency. I think actually it sends a very strong message that, you know, if you are going to invade another country, commit war crimes and genocide, you will have your assets frozen. Maybe the countries will be less willing to do it if their assets were actually frozen and allocated. And the other argument is a property rights argument. Yeah? We're worried about, you know, what this signals in terms of the sanctity of a rule of law in Western jurisdictions. I'd argue, firstly, you know, where was rule of law when we accepted this money in the first place? We all knew that Russian oligarchic money was dirty. We still accepted it. We didn't ask enough questions. We didn't ask enough questions about the jurisdictions and the rule of law in the countries where we were accepting the money from. And, you know, in the end, I think it's crystal clear to everyone that Russia is conducting, well, it's attacking Ukrainian property rights by stealing its land, stealing its property, murdering its population. The moral argument, I think, for using these assets is pretty clear. And, you know, I think I'd use it, somebody may struggle with this analogy, but, you know, this project is so important. Laws are set by politicians. Laws can be changed where there's a need, and I would say this is a security priority of the West to change laws. The Swiss government did it, if you remember, with respect to the Credit Suisse and subordinated debt liabilities. You know, it changed laws retrospectively for national security interests. This is a national security interest. We have to change laws to make this happen. If we don't do it, the money will not be there for Ukrainian reconstruction. It will fail, and think about the consequences of that.
Thank you, Tim. That was quite hard hitting. I mean, I think we maybe need to reflect on our own role here. London is awash with dirty money. I'm not just talking about Russian dirty money, criminal money, Iranian money, you name it. You name a regime that has acted in a legal way, and then their money is in London, whether in property or in the city. So the British government's got a duty to act on this. We have, you're right, been too slow, and the only country that's legislated on it, not in a way, not in a fulsome way, is Canada, and actually very little kickback on the Canadian legislation, so it just shows that it can be done. So actually, both Tim and Olga, in slightly different ways, references. So Tim head-on talked about corruption in Ukraine, and Olga talked about reforms for particularly the private sector, but also for state, for the World Bank, for others to trust that their money is being spent properly and in the right way. We need to be confident that Ukraine will overcome corruption where it exists. And actually, even now with humanitarian aid, there are certain areas, certain oblasts, where there is significantly less humanitarian aid because of reputational issues around corruption of certain governors and regional governments. And so what needs to happen to overcome that? Because without that, I don't think we will see the full reconstruction of Ukraine. Maybe Olga, you want to start on that one?
We need to have one in order to be.
How do we overcome the corruption and also the perception of corruption?
Yeah, well, I think that Ukraine has made quite remarkable progress in its fight against corruption since 2014, and it is also remarkable that even during war, this fight does not stop. Actually, on the day, I don't know, it was an incident, so if it was intentional, that on the day when Ukraine marked the 10th anniversary of the beginning of the Revolution of Dignity on the 21st of November, there were 3 high-profile arrests related to corruption, and one of them was of an official who tried to bribe Mustafa Yen, who is now government official, who is also someone who actually called people to come to London in 2013 when he was still a journalist and activist. So somehow for me this is a demonstration of this transformation that Ukraine has undergone in these 10 years, you know, and someone who was a journalist fighting against corruption, or the corruption activist, is now an official and is now not accepting bribes and exposing attempts of corruption. And what else has happened in these 10 years, and I think it should continue, and it is continuing, is the increased transparency of public procurement. In many respects, thanks to digitalization. So a lot of public procurement became digital. People can access these records, they can monitor them, can inquire, can access information. So this is going on. And I think now there is an understanding at the society level and also at government level in Ukraine that fighting corruption is also something that's essential that Ukraine has to do in order to survive. So not just fight with Russia, but fight with corruption, because on the result of that fight will depend Ukraine's progress with its European integration, which is seen together with NATO integration as this final break with Russia, something that can ensure Ukraine's sustainable peace in Ukraine and the future of Ukraine.
Any reflections on this?
Yes, surely we've got to learn from the Second World War, post-war reconstruction of Europe, and we need a commission that is international. Obviously should be led by the European Union, given that Ukraine is about to enter the accession negotiations soon, and post-war reconstruction will overlap with accession, and hence, Brussels will have to take the leading role in that commission. But of course, our legislator, nations, World Bank, and other international institutions will have to be there, given that the Russian assets are frozen across various jurisdictions. That's one important issue, International Commission for Reconstruction, so that they can oversee and ensure some of the transparency and kind of help to overcome the various worries about corruption. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're not repeating the mistakes of Afghanistan war reconstruction, in which we have Western contractors and an extremely exorbitant cost of reconstruction. We have to use the Ukrainian suppliers, when the Ukrainian economy has to benefit for the multiplier to work, we have to use the domestic industry, and hence we have to have an international commission overseeing it, but you have to use the local suppliers and domestic industry as much as possible to make, for the biggest bang for the buck.
I'm going to posit this slightly different way to Tim before I go to the floor for questions. So, corruption isn't really an unknown thing in former Soviet republics. Nobody worries about corruption in the Baltic states. So is the process of EU accession part of the solution for corruption in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, look, one reason Ukraine has such high corruption is because it lacked an EU accession anchor for 30 years, right? I mean, it's been in this no man's land between East. I mean, it's interesting, before the annexation of Crimea and Russia's intervention in Donbass and the invasion, the Russian argument was, Ukraine should be this bridge between East and West, right? I mean, Ukraine was that bridge between East and West. It failed. There was no anchor reform, there was no blueprint reform, EU accession. That happened for Poland, Baltic states, Czech Republic, Hungary. So for me, the number one, or one of the big priorities for fighting corruption is this, giving them a realistic perspective on EU accession, which means a date. Right? It can be 10 years down the line, it can be 15 years down the line, but what was proven with the Treaty of Copenhagen in '94, when all those countries in Central Europe were given a 10-year perspective for membership, once you give a deadline and you give them things that they need to do, they do it. Ukraine never had that, so that's really, really important. Secondly, I think the digitalization is really important. I mean, reduce the scope for corruption. You do that, I mean, ProZorba was very successful, what the Baltics have done, what the Georgians did, in terms of digitalization of governments. That's really, really important. The third one, I'd say, and it's linked to actually the recovery, the funding the recovery into the private sector. Again, it frustrates me, 18 months into more than 18 months into the invasion, and lots of talk about recovery and reconstruction. We don't really have the right institutional setting around recovery and reconstruction. For me, again, this is the number one project. It's a huge strategic priority, it's a huge financial commitment. Already lots of Western taxpayer money has gone into Ukraine, probably about $100 billion in terms of fiscal support for the country. And we're not thinking about the right institutional setting. We're going to pump this money into Ukraine. What about accountability? What about planning? I do think there's a need for a recovery and reconstruction agency that's part owned by Western donors, part owned by Ukraine. You could think of what happened after the end of communism. We created the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It was very successful given its mandate. People have suggested that EBRD takes that role. It can also have oversight over corruption. People suggest the EBRD takes that role. I think it's the wrong institution, it's got the wrong shareholders, it includes Russia, it includes the Middle East, it's got the wrong remit. This project is important enough that it has its own institution to manage the recovery and reconstruction, and could be a partner for private investors. Thinking about corruption, you know, we've had many investments in Ukraine. I mean, the key is the partner. If we had a partner in Ukraine like this agency that would be, again, co-owned by G7 and the Ukrainian government, we would trust it to get things done, to lobby for reform, to be an agent for change in the country. But unfortunately, there's no joined up thinking. There's no leadership by G7. It's remarkable. You know, we have the Ramstein process for the military support for Ukraine. We need a financial Ramstein. You know, nobody's thinking that there's no joined up thinking at all around recovery and reconstruction, which is terrible, right? It's a sad indictment of us and our leadership.
Financial Ramstein. So now over to you. So Roger's got the microphone. So let's hear your questions. We've got one towards the back.
Let's take them three at a time again as before. So the gentleman in the front row first. And remember, please stand up and say your name and, if possible, look to the camera. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting discussion about reconstruction. We have been involved in the reconstruction discussion for about 2 years. I'm Nasser Fulagi, I'm a ophthalmologist, I'm a surgeon, and I'm also co-founder of Circle Health, which is Georgia's private provider of healthcare in the UK. We have been working with Ukrainian medical shelter, which is newly established. Now, my 3 points is one. If we want to have a different country in Ukraine or anywhere, we need to build knowledge economy like Finland. It's not about infrastructure necessarily at the end of the day. And the second thing is Ukraine is good at it. We have 70,000 students, overseas students before the war. That means you already have knowledge economy. And the third one, to Olga's point, there are 7 million refugees. We have a duty today, not tomorrow, to make those people to work in the professional work they do, and then take that knowledge back in one way or the other, not necessarily moving there. We have 1,000 Ukrainian doctors and dentists in the UK. It's appalling that after 2 years we have not got them to UK healthcare. You say a third. Now, that building that knowledge economy doesn't need money today. It requires a willing of UK government and the other government to make that happen. So I just want to say one thing we could commit to you all, what we're going to do about those Ukrainian refugees.
Thank you very much. What are you going to do about those Ukrainian refugees? Remember, please stand up and say your name and your question, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Kazberka. I wanted to ask you that most of the Ukrainian heavy industry was created during Bolshevik times, rebuilt it after the Second World War. Most of them now belongs to the Ukrainian oligarchs. Are there any dialogue, if any, with Ukrainian oligarchs to be involved in rebuilding the industry? Because it's not just you guys like team and investing billions of pounds, there is private enterprises. So what's the dialogue with the Ukrainian oligarchs?
Thank you. Thank you. And a third question over here, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm David Chalmers, and I'm the chair of the Federal International Relations Committee with the Independents. And I'm very interested in the whole what we've been hearing all day. I just wanted to point out that, and also I'm responsible for leading our party's delegation to ALDE, which is the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats across Europe. And we have, as part of that party, Zelensky's so the People Party and also the opposition party, Holos. So we had regular dialogue with these parties over the last few years. One of the things that we are very keen on in working with the Ukrainians is looking at what sort of society we want to see with Ukraine going forward. And you heard from Judy Smith, my colleague who's our defence spokesperson of the Lords earlier on, talking about sort of the pragmatic side of things. And that's partly, I think, because what we hear from our sister parties across Europe as well, in that we are concerned with what we can do to rebuild Ukraine, what we can do to have sort of the society that we want post-war, but also on the pragmatic side as well. But one of the things, that is a real sort of issue which I think needs to be looked at, and how we as countries sort of support Ukraine. But one of the things I just wanted to observe on was, for us, how it has actually changed the liberal parties across Europe and our willingness to fight for our societies and our values. My own party had a very strong pacifist section within it. We've traditionally sort of taken a very sort of balanced position. Just recently, our public conference, that has gone. We really understand the need now that what our societies, and I think what the opening statement from Judy was that Ukraine is fighting for us and for our values, and we acknowledge that. And I think that you find that in liberal parties in government across Europe, and there is an opportunity to actually tap into that and where that might go. So I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ewan, I know we've got. I've just taken all the questions.
Make it more complicated for the panelists.
Because we just won't have time for another round. So let me check, Alex, if I may. Are you happy for us to have your question over the drink at lunch, or did you want to? Yeah.
Well, it would be a one-liner.
Okay. Let me just say one, and then.
Otherwise, we can do it over lunch, but it would be a one.
Go, let's have your one line. I'm on everybody's side, not just the panel. Go on.
Based for all of you, but particularly based on what Mr. Ash said, which organisations are taking account in relation to costs of reconstruction that the benefits of Ukraine's military experience is huge for the defence budgets of NATO?
Thank you, sir. The refugees, the oligarchs, political parties. Alex, I should just say also that Kira Rudik from your party was going to be here, and I apologise to everybody that we did advertise that she would be on the programme, and she was called away to a meeting, an ALDE meeting actually in Brussels, which is the reason that she is not here. So, Alex, we have 6 or 7 minutes, and then I need to just wrap up and do a vote of thanks. So, back to you and the panel to answer the questions.
I was just at dinner the other night, and every Liberal Democrat around the table spoke of the Muslim liberalism that Vladimir Zelensky was initiated in other Liberal parties across Europe, so that's interesting to know. My own party doesn't have a sister party in the Rada, but that's something we want to take forward as well, SD platforms. So I think it's important that Ukraine's represented across all of the groups that sit in the European, well, maybe not all the groups, maybe all the groups from the centre-right to the centre-left anyway, which is the case in the European Parliament. And just on the oligarchs one, before I bring Tim in, DTEK, which is owned by the richest man in Ukraine, built half of its wind farm during the war. So, the heavy lifting is, whatever we think of the individuals, the heavy lifting is already starting to happen. And those unlike Russia, where a lot of the oligarchs are cut and run, Ukrainian oligarchs seem to be patriots, even the ones that lead the opposition. So, over to you, Tim.
Well, some of the oligarchs were patriotic, some of them did run. Plenty of them did run. Kolomoisky, etc. Zhivago. There's plenty of examples. You're right. These are extremely rich people who should have an interest in reinvesting back in their own country. Akhmetov to give him credit. As you said, it's still is invested in DTEC. I think he's done a remarkable job in terms of keeping the energy system functioning. But you're absolutely right. But the reality is the scale, the numbers are just so enormous that Ukraine really doesn't have the resources itself to fund. I mean, you know, if you take it, probably it's $50 billion a year for the next 10 years at least. Right? I mean, this is a $200 billion economy. The numbers just don't add up, right? So external support is needed. Maybe use this point to a little bit of time I have. I mean, just to go back to the frozen Russian assets, it's quite interesting actually that the European Commission have gone down the fudge route, which is basically using the investment returns on Euroclear assets in Belgium, right? The best case from that scenario is it will generate about 3.5 to 4 billion euros a year. It's not enough. Right? I mean, we could be more innovative. I mean, I'm in the investment business. You could invest those assets in something that's high yielding. At the moment, they're invested in low risk treasuries, US treasuries, bonds, you name it, right? I mean, you could imagine investing in a benchmark of EM bonds, right? Pay 10%. So 300 billion or 400 billion invested in 10% gives you 40 billion return. You could issue Ukrainian reconstruction bonds, for example. So you could use the frozen assets, they could purchase the Ukrainian reconstruction bonds. Actually, the capital, in terms of the ownership issues and the attach on property rights, it resolves the problem. Russia retains ownership. You're just investing them in Ukraine, right? And that would solve the problem overnight. And actually, you could pay a return. Ukraine could actually then pay a return to Russia in terms of the accounts held at Euroclear. But look, bottom line is we need to think outside the box. We need to be innovative. Whoever said it earlier, I mean, Ukrainians are fighting for us. It's the front line of defense. We have to be successful, right? We have to think outside the box. You know, we have to, you know, take Putin on in his own game. But we're not. You know, we're tying Ukraine's hands behind their backs. Their backs are not also our own.
Thank you. Maybe Vlad, you take the knowledge economy point on?
Just before the knowledge economy, which I think there was not a question, it was praise of the Ukrainian knowledge economy in existence and also the need for us to use that asset, whether it is in Ukraine or abroad. So I totally agree with that. And it is an extreme shame. And we have all relatives and friends who are doctors or dentists in the UK or in Germany or elsewhere who are struggling to find professional jobs because of various legal obvious constraints and barriers to that profession. So I agree with that. On the political spokespersons, I use sensitive language. We approached two Ukrainian largest steel producers for the Green Steel Ukraine project. ArcelorMittal did not came to us back, but Metinvest came and also they pledged over 30 billion to invest in Green Steel Ukraine out of the, as I said, the total bill of 46. So Metinvest has actively pledged to totally reconstruct its own assets and its own steel industry base. So there is a huge positive line there. There is an interesting and intriguing, since Tim has mentioned EBRD, a lot of foreign Western institutions, financial institutions, do not lend money to politically exposed persons. So if you want to do Green Steel Ukraine, for example, project, and you're one of those people, you cannot borrow money from Western institutions to invest in green steel or green economy generally. Because of that, it's a political label that you use. So there is a, we've got to also maybe be a bit clever here as well, to be more creative and try to think about the overall aim rather than label or somebody's been somewhere wrong time 10 years, 20 years ago. So I think there is another issue here as well on the legal front.
Yeah, just a quick comment on refugees. Yeah, as well, I absolutely agree with you that there is a lot of resources that Ukraine can use, and I think as we're speaking here in the UK, so what UK and other host countries can do maybe more proactively at this moment is, well, not just give legal possibility of access to the labor market to these refugees, but also help them to upskill, to reskill them, having in mind the needs that Ukraine will have for its reconstruction. So there is a very clear, or there could be a very clear list of priorities, the sectors that Ukraine will need most, well, starting from mental health, rehabilitation for war veterans, reintegration them into the society, but also things like institutionalization of childcare and so on, in which Ukraine would need professionals, and these professionals could get these skills while they are temporarily abroad. So I would say the more cooperation needed between both the governments but also the non-governmental actors, with a very clear intention. We are doing that so that these people can then contribute, because otherwise it could be perceived by the Ukrainian government as an encouragement for these people to stay and not return to Ukraine, but very clearly stating we are doing that together in cooperation so that we are equipping these people with new skills so that they can use them for the
Thank you. Thank you much.
Thank you, Alex. And just before we thank our panel, just a couple of thank yous from me. First of all, to the Economic Forum, to Zygmunt Bedikowski again for putting this event on. To our partners and sponsors, the Federal Trust, Brendan Donnelly, and to Media Dialogue, Wolfgang Reisman, thank you for supporting us, and to New Europeans, Bill Shacklock's here from New Europeans, to Lena, my assistant, who is from Ukraine, to the wonderful team here, Maria is not here, and Alex, and Victor, who is also from Ukraine, who looked after us today. To all our panelists and speakers, Alex, thank you, and dear colleagues. Most of all, to all of you for being here, for participating. We'd like to see you again back here next year in London for the next annual outreach conference in London on the future of Ukraine. That'll be, we hope, at a similar time next year. In the meantime, we'd love to see you in Carpacks for the Polish Davos, which the dates of which are in the Carpathian Mountains. I think I'm right in saying, Andres, the 3rd to the 6th of September, is that correct? The first week of September, the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah. Or indeed in Mykolaiszki, which is near the Masurian Lakes, which is at the beginning of March, 6th and 7th of March. So it just remains for me to say thank you all very much. Do stay and have a drink, and see you all in Poland or in London next year. Thank you very much.